Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 29th of March 2018, a little after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, Brian Gerrish. We're also joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure, and of course, David reporting from north of the border. So run and hide, we may tell Theresa May.
Well, look, she is back on the phone with Donald Trump last night. I'm paraphrasing a little bit of what she said. She said, "I telephoned Donald today," which was yesterday, of course, to welcome the US decision to expel 60 Russian diplomats in response to the use of a nerve agent in Salisbury. But I also asked him why he's not tweeted his disgust at the Skripal poisonings. He has tweeted congratulations to Mr. Putin for winning the election. Whose side is he on? And this was an issue, Brian, that was being discussed on the BBC this morning on Radio 4's Today programme. Because clearly BBC Radio 4 cannot get to grips with the fact that we have this continuation of this sort of schizophrenic foreign policy approach from the United States. And frankly, unless Trump is tweeting about something, he's not saying it. So he's got people around him that are doing things and are saying things, but unless he tweets about it, he's not saying things. So I was interested to get David's thoughts on this. Welcome to the programme, David. You know, the BBC clearly can't get to grips with Trump and what he's about, but you know, he has not tweeted any criticism of Russia with regard to the Skripal event just yet.
Seems to be a little off script, doesn't he? I mean, I have a little sympathy for the BBC here, because what is Trump about? We saw him sign into law a huge budget increase without getting apparently anything for it. This is the traditional Republican policy of cut taxes and increase spending, and of course it doesn't work. So that's not in the interest of the American people. But there does seem to be at least a little bit of a counterattack on some of the criminality in Washington, and that wouldn't have happened under Hillary. So yeah, it's difficult to just decide where he is.
Yep.
Okay, well, we better get back focusing on the Russian beast from the east. No, that was the weather, wasn't it? It's just that nasty Mr. Putin. The BBC is on overdrive, and I think the BBC's professional reporting is starting to literally fall apart. This was the headline: spy poisoning, highest amount of nerve agent was on the door. And this was pushed out with the BBC 8 hours ago. What did they have to say? Well, they said this: the highest concentration of the agent used against Sergei and Yulia Skripal was found on their front door. We had, these two traces of the nerve agent had been found at some of the other sites in the city, but they were at lower concentrations. Security correspondent Gordon Carrera said the highest concentration was found on the Skripal's door handle and could have been administered through a gloopy substance, which could have been smeared onto that door handle. This is really impressive reporting. Remember, we're talking supposedly about a weapons-grade nerve agent, and some gloopy substance has been put on a door handle, and then they've touched it, and then they've gone to other places all over Salisbury, Mike. But we haven't got any other casualties. Well, we had the policeman, but we haven't got any casualties in the hospital where they were taken. We haven't got any casualties from the things they touched. But this was, according to the BBC, this is, you know, the real thing. This is weaponized nerve agent. So we go on to the last one. He added it would explain why the nerve agent may have been found on the Skripal's car, which has been taken by police, or the restaurant in which they'd eaten, which had been cordoned off by detectives. So this is making a story out of nothing, really, because we're not seeing any evidence for any of the things he's saying. And of course, we know that when the police started to turn their attention to the car, it was moved without any precautions for a nerve agent, and it was put in a pound where other members of the public were freely walking around, and then they lost the truck that they towed it there. So I'm going to say once again, for them to say that this was weapons grade nerve agent which was casually being spread over parts of Salisbury, but we have no further casualties, simply does not stack up. So let's have a look at the man in question, if I can bring him on here. Major update, this is his Twitter. Major update on Skripal investigation from police. Detectives believe Skripals first came into contact with the nerve agent at their home address. Specialists have identified the highest concentrations of the nerve agent to date as being on the front door of the address. Well, I couldn't resist sort of posting a bit in there, so I said, your BBC News Skripal story, Gordon Carrera, is not credible. Weaponised nerve agent plastered on door handle, spread to car, which authorities lost at one point together with a tow truck. No decontamination boundary, wrong police suits, and yet no casualties. So I had great fun posting that on his Twitter page, and hopefully a lot of people are going to read it and start asking the same questions that I'm asking. But what is this man on to now? Well, he's moved on to really important things, because he's very big on the fact it's some anniversary of MI4.5, which was the original pigeon service for carrying messages around during World War II. This moves from creating a story out of these little snippets, which are then woven together in the official government style, and what is cartoon. And I think you're going to be talking a bit more about cartoon stuff. But the public have been doing a really good job, because there was his tweet. And what had the public got to say? Well, somebody had posted this. They'd said, as broken in the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People 3 days ago. So the BBC puts it out as though they've got some new story, and in fact it's already been pushed out by other newspapers. But the prize, David, pay attention because you'll enjoy this one. The prize here goes to this man and his tweet, which was really excellent. He says, highly targeted, liquid on the door handle, candlestick in the library. So,
Yes.
David, the public are literally beginning to see right through these reports, and this is immensely powerful, isn't it? Particularly when people are using humour to deconstruct this official narrative.
Humour and facts. One of the other tweets I saw in response to this BBC report was a photograph of a policeman who'd been sent to guard the house, standing right next to the door, at the epicentre of the nerve agent, wearing standard police uniform, which apparently is all you need now to protect you from deadly nerve agents. And this policeman is obviously well. Seems a bit surprising.
Well, I think I can answer that. I think he's probably washed his uniform, or if his uniform is dry clean only, he's probably put it in 2 bags. Was he wearing bags at all at the time? I don't know. Well, let's stay on the BBC because it gets even more bizarre. Let's have a look at this story. What does the expulsion mean for Russia's spies? And this is Mr. Gordon Carrera again. He's moved over to a new topic. So let's have a look at how we go here. I'm really commenting on how he builds this article. So he brands the Russians as the bad guys very early on by reverting to the Cold War. And the implication is that the Cold War was all the fault of those nasty Russians. The West was not up to anything dirty at all. So let's get in the Cold War to get them branded early on in the article. Blame the Russians for spying activities, which the US and UK also indulge in, whilst claiming, of course, to be above such things. So does the British government and the US government use their intelligence services to spy via the embassies, via their security services by agents in foreign countries? Absolutely. In fact, the British government also uses the BBC to spy on what is happening in other countries. But of course, Mr. Carrera is not going to mention that. He drops in a bit of high-tech stuff. I think this is to really grip the imagination. So he says that the Russians have been using communications intercept equipment. Can you imagine that, Mike?
I can't.
These cunning Russians have been setting up receivers to eavesdrop on communications. I just can't imagine they'd do such a thing. And they've been using remote cyber data collection, cyberspace. Remarkable. Of course, we do exactly the same thing, and we have been doing for a great many years. He then puts a video of himself in, and this is full of supposition, likelihood, hypothesis, highly likely, no evidence whatsoever. And basically, he doesn't like the Russians because they hunt down traitors and they kill. That should be no mention that the same wet operations are carried out by the US and UK security agencies. So there's plenty of evidence of murders carried out overseas, and of course people were murdered. Do we know whether they'd been recruited to spy for the British government? We don't know. So we'd better bring this man in. I happened to take a screenshot when he was asleep, but maybe he was asleep when he was writing this article. This is dreadful stuff, Mike, absolutely appalling stuff. And of course, it's paid for out of a budget of a mere £3.74 billion of taxpayers' money. It's outrageous.
Well, we should bring the fusion doctrine in at this point because, of course, if we think the BBC and the other mainstream media have been bad up until now, it's only going to get 10 times worse. Much of the coverage, there's not too much coverage of the term fusion doctrine today, by the way, in the mainstream media. It's clearly been forgotten about already. If you do a search for it on Google News, for example, you'll find lots of articles from yesterday, not too much from today. The articles, though, said that the fusion doctrine had been unveiled. Well, in fact, it hasn't. It wasn't, and it may not even be, as we'll see in a moment. So here is the National Security Capability Review, and we're going to have a look to see what it says. It uses the term fusion doctrine quite a lot, but that term in itself is never defined, other than to say that it's a national security doctrine, but we don't know what the doctrine itself actually is. So anyway, what did Theresa May have to say in her introduction? She said, threats have continued to intensify and evolve and we face a range of complex challenges at home and overseas. The resurgence of state-based threats and increasing competition between states, the undermining of the international rules-based order, the rise in cyber attacks from both state and non-state actors, and the wider impact of technological developments, and the increase in threat posed by terrorism, extremism, and instability. She says, over the past year, in the UK, we have witnessed appalling terrorist attacks in London and Manchester, but also a brazen and reckless act of aggression on the streets of Salisbury, attempted murder using an illegal chemical weapon amounting to an unlawful use of force against the UK. So let's have a look and see what it says inside the document. The resurgence of state-based threats, intensifying wider state competition and erosion of the rules-based international order. This is what she said, makes it harder to build consensus. Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea was the first time since the Second World War that one sovereign nation was forcibly taken territory from another in Europe. Russia has fomented conflict in the Donbass and supported the Assad regime, including when the regime deliberately ignored its obligation to stop using chemical weapons. Russia has also violated the national airspace of European countries and mounted a sustained campaign of cyber espionage and disruption, including meddling in elections. Let's go on. Communications, however, are increasingly being used by our partners and adversaries alike for strategic real-world advantage. Traditional channels have been largely discarded in favour of digital and social media platforms. This is combined with a decline in trust in traditional sources of information and the era of so-called fake news. In parallel, the rules of the game have changed. The democratization of information and the means to exploit it has allowed hostile actors to exert disproportionate influence in competition with the public interest. So there we go. We've got the two targets. One is Russia, and the other is so-called hostile actors. Hostile actors are undefined, of course. We don't know who these are. But apparently hostile actors exert disproportionate influence in competition with the public interest. I would argue very strongly that, in fact, what she's describing as hostile actors are, in fact, acting in the public interest by exposing the lies and duplicity of the government and the mainstream media. But anyway, we'll continue. Let's have a look at some of the other things that they've been talking about in this. They want to build a culture of common purpose across departments, as across government departments, which requires improved accountability to shift incentives and behaviours towards a more genuinely whole-of-government approach. Fantastic. They say the number of cadet units in schools across the country will expand 500 by 2020. They say that up to 10,000 service personnel remain at staggered readiness for Operation Temporer. Now, Operation Temporer, people remember, is this business of the military on British streets support of the police, allegedly. So armed military in support of armed police. This is a militarization of the police. Further forces, they say, are available to augment armed police with a large strategic reserve of service personnel. So it goes on. We're taking a comprehensive approach to tackling the evil ideology of extremism, whether violent or non-violent, Islamist or far and extreme right wing. Again, these terms are not defined. We will establish a new intelligence framework, she says. We will make community engagement a cornerstone of our response to build resilience within communities and reduce public tolerance to criminal activity. Now, of course, that's the Stasi approach that we were discussing on the news yesterday. She says national resilience is truly collective, depending on all of us. Emergency responders, local and central government, the armed forces, businesses, communities, and individual members of the public. So we've got to be all working together to build this massive fusion of everybody, charities, military, police.
I just want to say, Mike, a little bit later in the news, we're going to be looking at the army, the head of the army, and if people can just remember this one, national resilience is truly collective. What an interesting word that is.
Absolutely.
Depending on all of us.
Okay, we go on. We will create a cross-government soft power strategy while respecting the independence of BBC World Service, British Council and many British institutions and brands that contribute to our soft power. Really. Let's go on. We will significantly expand the National Security Communications team to make communications an integral part of our approach to national security. So propaganda is going to be right at the heart of national security policy. And as I say, if you think that what we've seen from the mainstream media, and particularly the BBC up until now, is bad and it's getting more irrational by the day, we need to, I await with bated breath to see how bad it gets in the not too distant future. Our industrial strategy by 2030 will have transformed productivity and earning power across the UK to become the world's most innovative economy. In other words, deindustrialisation, reduction of productivity, reduction of earning power across the country.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with the health and wealth of the nation. It doesn't say that. It's just that we're going to become an innovative economy. It's going to be fascinating, but you won't actually have any jobs. Right. Everything is being set out in this document. If you read the words and you think about what it actually means, this is the fascist state. Economy collapse, so people can just be manipulated and do as they're told.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to come on to the Conflict Stability and Security Fund in a second, but before I do that, I'll put this up because inside this document, about 2/3 of the way through it, 5 things you need to know about life in Raqqa under Daesh. And David, it seemed to you, and when you said it to me, I appreciate where you're coming from, it seemed to you that as you read down through this list, this very well could have been applied to the United Kingdom under Theresa May.
Well, exactly so. I mean, what struck me was this is life in Coatbridge under the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, because this was what Dankula had experienced. But it's really true for everyone across the country. The claims of a strong economy were a lie. Yes. Foreign fighters. Well, if you do foreign fighters, if you take government officials and police and locals were deeply divided. Increasingly, that's true. The rules for behaviour baffled normal Raqqabis. The rules for behaviour, and we're now locking up comics for telling jokes, and we're barring people from coming into the country if they have the wrong opinions. And we used to be a country that stood for freedom. The rules just don't make any sense anymore. Punishment for breaking the rules created a climate of intense fear. Yes, that is rather the point. Why is Dankula being prosecuted? Why is this attack on free speech going on? Well, you have to silence the opposition. You silence the opposition by randomly picking on some people in strange ways so that no one quite knows who's next. Not everyone that gets persecuted, that gets prosecuted for weird things. You just have to do enough so the rest get the message. And the system of rule was rife with hypocrisy. That one needs no further comment.
No, indeed. So those 5 items that they are describing as life under Daesh, without question, could be applied to life under Theresa May, and in fact, just about every prime minister for the last 40 years. But anyway, I just want to end this section by mentioning the Conflict Security and Stability Fund. This is the money which has been going to the White Helmets, for example, in Syria, part of it anyway. But they provided a nice little atlas there showing where the money from the CSSF is going to in the world. And what I thought would be a useful thing to do, I haven't done it yet, but a useful thing to do would be just to correlate the locations of the worst strife in the world and see whether there's a correlation there. And in fact, I believe there is. I mean, we've got the Middle East there, we've got Pakistan and Afghanistan, we've got Eastern Europe, we've got Eastern Africa, and also just the sub-Saharan Africa there, and also in the western parts of South America. And indeed, I think we will find that where the biggest trouble spots in the world are, the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund is sure to be. And the question is there then, does it follow or does it lead? And I suspect it leads. I believe it leads.
Absolutely. Well, David, let's come on to that Meacham case, which is, in fact, funny in some ways, but it's unbelievably serious in what it represents. So you were keen on this particular article, The Herald, how Nazi dog creator Mark Meacham clashed with Father Ted Reiter. And the one that we've juxtaposed with this is a BBC article, Nazi Germany pursued Hitler's salute Finnish dog. So in the BBC news article, the Nazis are bad people because they were taking this man to task. They thought that the dog doing Hitler salutes was insulting, and they raided his business and a few other things. So in the BBC version, the Nazis are bad people, but the reality of UK is that we have the Nazis installed in our own government who are now banning free speech. This is unbelievably serious.
Yes, the BBC article was fascinating because, bear in mind what's happened. Someone made a video and made a joke about the Nazis, a joke at the Nazis' expense, and was prosecuted for hate speech under the claim that it was grossly offensive. Now, if we go back to the 1940s and have a look at what the Nazis were doing, the BBC report here, a Finnish dog which gave Nazi salutes so annoyed Germany's World War II government that it launched a campaign against its owner. Torborg's wife had reported giving Jackie the nickname Hitler, saying the dog's strange way of raising its paw and barking reminded her of the Führer. And in one exchange between the German government and their consulate in Helsinki, the German vice consul wrote, a witness who does not want to be named said that he saw and heard how the Borg's dog reacted to the command Hitler by raising its paw. Mr. Borg was called to the German embassy for questioning, and he admitted that his wife Josephine, a known anti-Nazi German, had called the dog Hitler, but denied being involved in anything that could be seen as an insult to the Reich. The embassy, however, thought otherwise, telling officials in Berlin. Borg, even though he claims otherwise, is not telling the truth. Now, the Germans eventually decided not to proceed because of lack of evidence, and they let the thing eventually die down. Now, of course, the Borgs didn't make a video. Had they done so, their experience would have been even more similar to Dankula's.
Yeah, I find this whole episode particularly worrying. I think I'm going to question my Cocker Spaniel under prevent strategy and see whether she's actually come across any of this stuff, because if I had my dog doing that, we could be in big trouble, Mike.
Absolutely.
Was the plan to bring the dogs into court and question them?
No, the claim was the dog was simply cover. The judge, now there are many things about this that are deeply worrying, and you should be deeply worried. Spiked under an article, Free Count Dankula, commented on this. He said that an important aspect of the prosecution strategy was outlined by Meacham himself in a statement after the verdict. For the Nazi pug video to be deemed both threatening and offensive, it was essential that the judge disregarded the principles of context and intent. In other words, the joke had to be willfully misunderstood in order to justify the conviction. Accordingly, the prosecution described the inclusion of the dog as an attempt to muddy the waters. You see, the dog's just muddying the waters now. Around Meakin producing and posting the video. He says that he knows the context of the video, but in a criminal court in Scotland, he does not decide the context of anything. The court decides the context. So whatever you say, in whatever context, the court will decide what that context is, not anything rational, not your intent. Your intent doesn't matter. And you see the change here. It's gone from being intent to you intent. Is there evil intent?
To be proven.
To be proven. Mens rea, evil intent, to an entirely subjective reaction. Is someone offended? Does someone think you might have had had evil intent? No, it's not what your evil intent was. It's what someone else has perceived. So if someone's offended, if someone thinks that you need to be punished, that's enough now. The law has become entirely subjective.
Excuse me.
So Jonathan Pye has commented on this then.
Jonathan has. Now, I was born and bred in Airdrie. This is my hometown, and there are some real aspects to this. Jonathan Pye did an excellent piece to camera, and in order to mock the verdict, right, and you have to be careful doing that in Scotland because it's called
murmuring.
It's called murmuring. That's it, murmuring a judge. Jonathan did a funny goose step walk up and down outside Airdrie Sheriff Court while singing "Springtime for Hitler." It was a surreal moment to see from my hometown, but I get his point, and his point's well made, because these are parts of our culture. This is a history of comedy. This is a history of free speech. This is a history of mocking the establishment, and it's now being criminalised.
Yeah, and sorry, David, this next one, if I may, while I was preparing this slide for you, I just looked at the youngster at the top with the blonde hair and the short haircut, and I thought, I think I've seen young leaders like this in another time and space. I'll leave it there. You're one click away from losing everything. This is threats by Police Scotland, and on the right they tweeted out, inset in that image, be above being a hater. But if somebody accuses you, you're going to be brought down. You're going to lose everything. This is raw fascism.
Yes, one click away, one misspoken word, and your life will be destroyed. That's the message. Now, this little tweet from Police Scotland, please look out for it on Twitter, because the last time I checked, there was 1,000 replies to Police Scotland, and the quality of the replies was excellent, and it was very funny. But I'll just read a couple of things here. Hate crime includes, this is Police Scotland telling you what hate crime includes. Offensive graffiti, I thought graffiti was a crime anyway. Damaging or stealing property, who knew that was a crime? Okay, it's the 8th commandment, but it's news to Police Scotland, they're telling you it's wrong. Shouting, online abuse, swearing, threatening, physically attacking. So shouting up to physically attacking is just a spectrum, right? There's no clear lines here anymore. And online abuse. And then they have a little diagram, and it says it's a crime to pick on someone because of who they are attracted to, the gender they identify with, the disability, the race, the religion or belief. A couple of things quickly about that. Who they are attracted to and their gender are two entirely separate things. This is the philosophy that we've seen in Canada with Jordan Peterson, who says that the Canadian law now says that your biological gender, your gender expression, which is how you dress, your sexual attraction, are all entirely separate from one another and vary independently, which is rubbish. And we're seeing that philosophy actually being reflected in Police Scotland output, which is really quite sinister. And when they mention belief, they say on the one hand, your beliefs are protected. But on the other hand, they're saying, no, your beliefs are policed. The entire thing's incoherent. Very interesting.
Well, what we've got is the police social engineering. Let's come back on the British Army and see some remarkable things. This is General Nick Carter crowing that he's honoured and humbled by the announcement of his appointment as the next Chief of the Defence Staff. With the eyes of Wellington upon me at the start of the Army Board, the perfect historic location to lay out the Army's ambitious strategy for adapting to the intensifying threats. And they're all crowded round to the schoolboy Gavin Williamson, the Defence Secretary, in the middle. He's very small, of course. Now, what has this general been up to? Well, you can get a lot from his Twitter page because he's full of newspeak. Pertinent questions from inquiring young minds at the Junior Command and Staff course LAND reinforce the imperative to maximise talent. A modernised career structure, remodelled learning, training and education interventions geared with a true talent-based management system. This is remarkable, isn't it, for an army which should be a mere 82,000 men, but the man responsible for that recruiting failed. So I think it's about 4,000 people short. And if we've got 10,000 earmarked for Operation Tempora, was it, Mike, you mentioned earlier, then the British Army has ceased to exist. But not to worry, because what is he doing? Well, he's busy, I was going to say sucking up, I'm sure I can't say that, to the Europeans. And here he is with Major General Mark Thies. Strong international relationships and fighting and operating integrated with allies and partners are major factors in our future force design. There's the clue. There isn't going to be a separate British Army. Yeah. It's going to be part of the EU unified military structure. And then he tweeted out this: good to engage with next generation of leaders across a range of organisations and institutions, collaborating on changes and practical challenges and practices of responsible leadership and generating cultural change. So the head of our armed forces is now responsible for generating cultural change.
When did that become part of his terms of reference?
I suspect it was never made part of his terms of reference, but this just gets better and better. A big thank you to General Sir Nick Carter for his fantastic speech at the launch of our 2017 cohort yesterday at British Army. So what was going on here? Well, this is what it was to do with the Forward Institute, and I found that absolutely fascinating. We'll do a bit more on that in a minute, but just as an intervention, let's remember that Veterans for Britain had warned us that the EU military, the unified structure, was absolutely happening. That means that Federica Mogherini is the boss, and that means that this man, Nick Carter, is her lieutenant. He's just her little schoolboy to do what he's told by the European Union. Now have a look what Nick Carter is really up to, because here is Forward Institute. The banner across the top of the page there, inset, says capitalism is crisis. Capitalism is crisis. And what is this organisation? Well, it's astonishing. Here we are, the Fellowship. These are all future leaders, Mike, but very high level. Some of them, well, make your own mind up about that one. We've got them basically talking about a range of things. Mounting economic, social and environmental concerns are placing growing demands on leaders. At the same time, public trust in capitalism and its institutions have been shaken. Organisations are being challenged to demonstrate a social licence to operate alongside traditional, often short-term metrics of success. So what has this got to do with the British Army? Well, you say, well, okay, he spoke at this event. Well, no, he didn't. Because if we look at the people involved, we find that he is part of this organisation, sitting along bankers such as Sir Anthony Saltz, the former vice chairman of Rothschild. But we've got Barclays Bank, we've got big corporations, we've got Sir Jeremy Hayward, Cabinet Secretary, Head of the Civil Service, listed. Who else have we got? Head of Investor Relations, Barclays, founder of Jericho Chambers, that was quite a fascinating one, Professor of Management Practice, the London Business School, the CEO of Visa Europe. So what has this general been discussing behind closed doors with huge corporations and banking, immensely wealthy banking interests? What has he been discussing?
I don't know, but you put the military together with bankers. I don't have a very positive outlook for peace on this planet.
No, because if you want to make some money, kick off a war. So we will be asking Sir General Nick Carter what he has been doing behind closed doors with those individuals. But the whole thing reeks of high-level common purpose leadership. This is nothing to do with defence or supporting the British Army. This is to do with changing society. So he's getting involved in a political role.
Yes. Now let's have our daily dose of fake news. Then this is the Times. This was the Times front page yesterday, and I do apologise we missed this yesterday. But on the front page of the Times, we have this dirty secret: rubber ducks are so filthy they can kill. So we've got to be scared of our children playing with rubber ducks in the bath. This is extremely dangerous. The Times front page article yesterday was followed up by ITV, apparently, and thanks to Tony Peacock for pushing this out. So here's a screenshot of ITV programme yesterday with an ITV presenter holding a rubber duck. He must have been a bit like those people coming in contact with Novichok, Brian. He must have been taking his life in his hands to be holding
That's a very good point, Mike, actually.
In that way.
He's washed his suit, though.
Quite possibly. But I'm going to leave it to Earl Sheffield to sum this up, really, because he pushed this out on Facebook, this image with a row of rubber ducks, and the caption said, "Shit, there's a whole legion of these little commie blighters in my bathroom, probably swapping my Radox for Novichoks as we speak." The Times, I don't even know where to begin with it, but we are going to label this one as fake news. David, 30 seconds of your view on what the Times is up to here.
It'll take me more than 30 seconds to stop laughing. This is just incredible. I mean, what are they doing? This was on the front page. There's all this stuff happening in the world, and they go, the front page of the Times is killer ducks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't comment.
It's part of the new national security strategy, David, and we're seeing it in action right now.
Okay. Well, they're talking about the dangers of ducks. What they're not talking about, of course, is reality going on in the world, and Mr. Sarkozy under some pressure. Although this isn't well reported, but the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy charged with accepting 42 million in illegal cash from Colonel Gaddafi. Oh, but I thought he was part of our partnership to fight baddies in the world, Mike.
Up to a point.
Oh, yeah, it is confusing. The New York Times, Nicolas Sarkozy and the Libya investigation, the key questions. And Sarkozy says Libya lies made his life hell.
David.
Well, yes, and what else does he say? Quote, politics, that's over. So his political career is gone, and he recognises this. Now, we're talking about huge sums of money. We're talking about $62 million, 50 million euros, allegedly from Colonel Gaddafi. It's being investigated. Mr. Sarkozy obviously proclaims his innocence. He says there's not one document, there's absolutely no proof. But my point in highlighting this is something's changed here, because you wouldn't normally get a leader who was involved in taking down a country held to account. And it's very strange, and there's something deeper under the surface here that Sarkozy is being held to account to at least some extent.
Yeah.
And I think it's one we should watch very carefully.
Okay, now David, just very briefly, because we're running out of time, but Gillard Atzman asking for support.
Yes, just direct people here to Gillard's website. He's looking for support, some donations. I understand that's actually going very well. He's been sued by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and he says, "I choose to fight their suit because I believe that the CAA and its chairman and its use of libel laws pose a danger to freedom of speech." And that is very much where he's coming from. And some people will have noticed that the same organisation, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, were responsible for closing down David Icke's speech in his hometown of Leicester. And after failing to convince the theatre in which he was speaking that there was a threat or there was a groundswell against David Icke, which clearly there wasn't, they went to the police. and the police counter-terrorism officer went to the theatre and scared the living daylights out of the management to such an extent that they cancelled the event. But it was the campaign against anti-Semitism that was at the heart of that. A very well-connected organisation. They boast of the links up to cabinet level, but very much an opponent of free speech. And I would argue very much an organisation that does great harm to the Jewish community in this country. So I would encourage people to support Gilad in his fight.
Okay, and we can follow that on very nicely because, of course, last Friday we reported on High Life Highland, and we played a telephone recording in which the young lady said that basically the Fresh Start booking wasn't going to go ahead. There was mention of a meeting with councils. There was mention that Fresh Start was considered anti-government. But we followed through. We did speak to High Life, and they came back with a statement which we will read out. A spokesperson for High Life Highland responded, Fresh Start Foundation has not been banned from booking or accessing any facilities operated by High Life Highland and can confirm that their booking scheduled to take place in Inverness on the 14th of April will go ahead. The spokesperson went on to confirm High Life Highland is responsible for all aspects of operating the sites it manages on behalf of the Highland Council and therefore has full autonomy on day-to-day basis in terms of which bookings are accommodated. Further routine bookings such as Fresh Start Foundations are officer delegated and not discussed at board level. So we've been up front there. We've posted their reply. What would you have to say about that, David?
Well, we're very delighted the event's going ahead, and it's going ahead in the venue that we wished. And we thank Highland High Life for sorting the problem out.
Excellent. And would you just like to talk us through your next event, the People's Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse?
Yes, next event is Dundee, and that's on Saturday, 11 till 3. So I encourage people to come along there. And the main speaker is Laurie Matthew. Now, Laurie is a very long time campaigner against abuse and someone who's run several charities helping the victims of childhood sexual abuse and particularly Satanist ritual abuse. And she is a very brave woman who speaks out fearlessly, and I'm looking forward enormously to hearing what she has to say. And the general debate that we're having within the Fresh Start Foundation roadshows is wonderful. The audience we're getting is extremely well informed, and something is happening that's quite organic, that's quite dynamic, and that the ideas are being refined, and we're seeing the organisation as a whole move forward and become something that's of the people, and people are getting involved with on the ground. So it's very heartening, early days yet, but very heartening, and I hope people can come along to Dundee and support us there.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, now the issue of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children is an issue that we've been covering over the last 2 or 3 years on this programme. And the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, David Bolt, has published an inspection report on how the Home Office considers the best interests of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So let's just have a look at some of the things that, this is the report, some of the things that it says. It says Home Office and stakeholders who believe that the child's voice was absent from the unique unaccompanied child record form. They argued that ensuring it was included would not only help inform transfer decisions, but also reduce the occasions where a child was resistant to moving or went missing because the move came as a surprise or had not been properly explained and their views expressly sought. Now, of course, the issue that I and the UK column been mainly concerned about is the number of missing asylum-seeking children that have arrived into this country and gone into the care system and disappeared from out the other side of the care system, and we're asking, are they being trafficked? Are they ending up in sex slavery? What's happening to these children? And remember, we're talking about children up to the age of 18, so it could be 16 and 17-year-olds as well. And I was just particularly interested in the discussion of children that went missing in this report. So it goes on. Stakeholders highlighted the impact of delays on a child's best interests. They increased the likelihood of children going missing once they were notified and they were being transferred because they'd become settled and were reluctant to move area. It goes on. Another part, inspectors were told that there had been incidents where children had been detained by the police and transferred to children's services without immigration enforcement attending to capture biometric details. If the child subsequently absconded from care, there was little or no data available to support a missing persons inquiry, thus exposing significant risk to those children and all agencies involved. It goes on, using the new form, the police would capture biometric information about the child, which would be transferred to the immigration enforcement team, and the information uploaded into Home Office IT systems. This data could be used to identify a child later if found after going missing, or if they committed a crime or were trafficked. So there's acknowledgement that children are going missing. There's acknowledgement that children are being trafficked. It goes on, inspectors were told that while waiting to be transferred, children form links to the entry local authority area and become settled. As a result, they may be reluctant to move, especially to areas away from London. Stakeholders highlighted that if a child remains in the entry area for a matter of months, the likelihood of them going missing when they're told they're being transferred increases. The NTS progress report dated 13th of October 2017 showed that 31 children had gone missing during the transfer process. Now, they do not state over what time period those 31 children went missing, but we know that that's only part of the picture, but let's keep going. It said inspectors were told that while waiting to be transferred, children that's a duplicate. So anyway, look, what's the bottom line here? There's very little being said about in this report about missing children. There's very little about the numbers of missing children, over what time periods they've gone missing, and so on. So in this respect, I've got to say that Mr. Bolt, his terms of reference have been pretty narrow. He hasn't really looked at this issue. Nobody is looking at this issue. Nobody seems to care about this issue.
Mike, I've got to say, on the contrary, John Wedger, Metropolitan Police whistleblower, did look at this area, and he was then bullied, hounded, pressurised by the Metropolitan Police in the establishment to shut up, because what he was talking about, children being taken, going missing, being groomed, prostituted, the government didn't want to know about that. Certainly Theresa May and the Home Office didn't want to know about it.
Okay, well, so I'll rephrase that. We'll say this within the infrastructure and the establishment and, and the people looking after these children as they come in. But so John Wedger's speaking out about it. Another organisation, as we've highlighted before, is ECPAT UK, who produced this report, Heading Back to Harm, where they were saying that at the time that this was produced, which was about 18 months ago, 167 of 590 children suspected or identified as child trafficking victims in the year from September 2014 to 2015 had vanished from foster and care homes across the country. 593 of the 4,744 unaccompanied children placed under the protection of local authorities also went missing at least once in the same time period. We don't know whether they came back, how many of them went missing permanently. Of the 760 trafficked or unaccompanied children who disappeared from care, 207 have never been found. So, okay, that answers that question. And the majority of trafficking victims who vanished from care were from Vietnam, Albania, and the UK. But this is before the main influx of Syrian children, for example. So that picture will have changed somewhat. So, as I say, in David Bolt's report, no focus on this at all. And of course, we've got to remember that the one person leading the campaign to bring more and more unaccompanied children to the UK, and who as recently as November last year, as you can see in this headline, was pressuring for more, he doesn't care about this. That, of course, is Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, and he told us and others it must be 2 years ago now, that children should not be brought, or we suggested to him that children should not be brought to this country until the issue of trafficking from care was dealt with. It's clearly still not being dealt with. He was reminded that in 2012, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Runaway and Missing Children had been talking about this as being a scandal involving children missing for care, which is largely going on unnoticed. 68,000 children in care. We've been through this before, but the point here is that Tim Farron is continuing to pressure for more children to come in, not prepared to have any kind of sensible discussion on what happens to those children once they come here. They clearly having biometric information taken from them, but also from the report, we're seeing that the system is stacked against them, and they're almost being pressured into running away in many cases.
Yeah. And nobody's doing anything once they're gone. But of course, what John Wedger said is actually they've been groomed and trafficked.
Yes. Shall we pass through this?
I think we should.
Okay. So.
Okay. Well, we will just remind people of the date, May the 12th, for the NHS conference. Very, very important that there's support of that conference because these brave speakers have come forward.
And we should mention that there will be no UK column news tomorrow or on Monday because we're taking a break for Easter. That's why David's on the programme today. But we just want to end with this fantastic little cartoon from Ned. Well, it's Kronos the spider, the tarantula, who belongs to, of course, Gavin Williamson, our
Defence Secretary.
Defence Secretary, yes. And Kronos is saying, have you got a copy of the UK column there, boy? He's saying this to Gavin. I want some news and be quick about it. So that's fantastic. And he's been labelled the Defence Prefect. I think that says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, what a situation, Mike. We have absolute proof now that we have a dictatorship which has established itself within the darker regions of government. Democracy in Westminster itself has gone. We've got a secret government operating through the Cabinet Office and its agents. And General Nick Carter has now given us a look at who those powerful people are, which include heads of the major banks, plus huge consultancies. And they're busy meeting behind closed doors to decide how we are going to live in the future. A remarkable thing for a British Army general to be involved in. So, David, it's all there. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'll end by saying thank you very much to the Cornwall team for the talk last night. Healthy detachment, which was really excellent. So thanks to Robbie and all the team. Keep going. We'll be back on Tuesday. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.